My mother did not say, "I miss you." She said, "We saw the girls." And in one sentence, 5 years of silence explained itself. The voicemail came in on a Wednesday afternoon while I was wiping yogurt off the leg of our kitchen table. One of my daughters was under the table making a cave out of dish towels. The other was in the hallway wearing rain boots with no pants, singing to herself like she had been hired. For private joy, my phone buzzed twice. Unknown number. Then voicemail. I almost deleted it. I get enough strange calls now that unknown numbers have started to feel like tiny administrative ambushes. But something in me paused. Maybe instinct. Maybe dread that had been sleeping in a chair by the door for years and never fully moved out. I hit play. My mother's voice arrived older, careful. Like a woman stepping into a room where she knows something breakable belongs to somebody else. "Clara," she said, which was already enough to make my throat tighten. Nobody in my life calls me Clara anymore. Except medical offices, my husband when he is being teasingly formal, and the version of my parents that still exists in memory. "We saw the girls online," she said. "They're beautiful. We didn't even know. Your father and I have been talking, and maybe it's time we all sat down. We would really like to reconcile. And of course, meet our granddaughters. Of course." That was the word that settled it. Not because grandparents are evil, not because children should be used as punishment, not because reconciliation is impossible, but because after 5 years, my mother still knew how to speak, as if the emotional conclusion had already been agreed to, and I was only being invited to the logistics. We would really like to reconcile. And of course, meet our granddaughters, as if those two desires were naturally linked. As if one proved the other. As if access were evidence. I listened to the message twice, then a third time, which was less about comprehension than about pain management. Sometimes, if you replay a wound enough, it stops feeling sharp and becomes architectural. You can finally see what it was made of. My younger daughter, Mina, crawled out from under the table with a spoon in her hand and asked why I looked mad at the phone. "I'm not mad," I said. That was not true. But I was not only mad. I was also 24 again, standing in my parents' driveway in a pale blue dress. I had spent too much money altering, while my father told me that if I walked into the courthouse with Julian, I should not expect to walk back out with the family. The worst thing about old pain is how efficiently it stores itself. It does not need much. A phrase, a voice, one familiar cadence. And suddenly your body has already found the exact room where it was once abandoned. I met Julian when I was 22, and very committed to becoming the kind of woman who answered emails at 6:13 a.m. and ate almonds for lunch because she was too disciplined for hunger. He was 36, creative director at the small branding studio, where I started as a junior coordinator. This is where people usually tense up, and I understand why. Power shifts matter, age gaps matter, office hierarchies matter, they should. Which is part of why our story was slower and less cinematic than the version my parents preferred. Nothing happened while he supervised me. Nothing happened in secret. Nothing happened because a man with authority noticed a younger woman and decided that was a form of luck. I transferred teams. He moved into a partner-facing role. A year passed. Then another stretch of months filled with group coffees, industry events, and conversations that became easier to anticipate than avoid. When he finally asked if I wanted dinner, he did it with the tone of somebody offering an exit inside the invitation. "If the history makes it weird, I'll survive," he said. I laughed. Then I said yes. It was not reckless. It was not hidden. It was not the kind of romance that needs dim lighting in order to survive scrutiny. It was, if anything, slightly over-documented. HR disclosures. Conflict of interest forms. 2 different conversations with 2 different people whose only job was to make sure nobody had to whisper later. My parents hated him before they met him. Not in a theatrical way. My mother was too polished for that. My father was too proud. Their disapproval came dressed as concern, which made it harder to fight cleanly. They said he was too old. They said former authority never really becomes equal. They said respectable men with good reputations usually know how to arrange a story that flatters them. Some of that I could hear. Some of that I even appreciated. There are warnings women should not ignore simply because they are inconvenient. But underneath the warnings was another current. Harder, colder, less noble. Julian had been divorced once. He had no children. He dressed well, without calling attention to it. He spoke slowly enough that people often mistook steadiness for superiority. My parents believed he would always look like the person who had taken something that belonged in a different order. A daughter should marry someone who fit the story first. Everything else was paperwork. The first dinner was awful. Not dramatic. Worse. Civil. My mother over-enunciated her compliments. My father asked Julian what kind of man starts over in his 30s, as if divorce were a failed exam rather than a human event. Julian answered everything without flinching. He did not perform charm. He did not grovel. He did not try to win them with strategic vulnerability. On the drive home, I asked if he was okay. He kept both hands on the wheel and said, "I think your parents are waiting for me to become simpler." That line stayed with me, because it was true. People who dislike a relationship sometimes tell themselves all they want is more information, but often what they actually want is a version of the story that lets them stay right. Julian proposed in a bookstore courtyard with no violin, no photographers, and no attempt to trap me inside spectacle. It was raining lightly. There was a delivery truck backing up nearby. I could smell wet concrete and coffee grounds and the cedar oil from the little planter boxes. It was perfect because it did not try to become legendary, it just felt true. My mother cried when I told her, which for one hopeful evening I mistook for softness. The next morning she sent me a 6-paragraph email asking whether I was making a permanent decision in reaction to temporary attention. My father called later and asked whether Julian had pressured me, then whether he had isolated me, then whether I had considered what people would assume. People. Always people. The invisible jury my parents worshipped more faithfully than any god who had ever asked them for mercy. I kept trying. That is the embarrassing part, maybe. How long I kept mistaking effort for inevitability. I offered counseling. I offered slower planning. I offered a small wedding, a private dinner, a neutral meeting, a chance for them to know the man before condemning the marriage. What they wanted was not more time. They wanted reversal. By the time we switched to a courthouse ceremony with 12 people and lunch afterward, I had stopped fantasizing about blessing. I was bargaining for decency. 3 days before the ceremony, my mother called and asked one final time if I was sure. I said yes. She went quiet long enough for me to hear what I had once feared most. Not rage, not sobbing, not a dramatic threat, just emotional withdrawal, becoming policy. Then she said, "If you do this, we won't be there to pretend it was a good idea. Pretend." As if attendance itself were a moral compromise. As if love were endorsement instead of witness. My father did not call, he sent a text. "Do what you want. We have said our piece. That was all." There are messages so concise they carry more violence than paragraphs. I still got married. Of course I did. Julian wore a navy suit. I wore the pale blue dress. My best friend Tess cried before the clerk even started talking. His sister fixed my hair with the competence of a person who had learned long ago that family can fail in one room and be rebuilt in another. The day itself was tender, oddly calm. The kind of day that keeps proving life can move forward without permission. At lunch, my phone stayed face down. No apology arrived. No last-minute panic. No softened parent running breathless through the door. By evening, absence had hardened into fact. They did not send flowers. They did not ask for photos. They did not check whether I was happy. Weeks later, my aunt mailed back the invitation magnet I had sent the family, still inside its original envelope, as if even my address was now excess intimacy. That was the first year. Then came the years after, which people romanticize when they have not lived them. They imagine estrangement as a clean severing. A bold line. Closure with good lighting. But actual estrangement is administrative. It is learning which holidays can be survived with alternate plans. It is flinching when a grocery store playlist plays one of your mother's favorite songs. It is wondering whether to tell new friends that your parents are alive but not available. It is rehearsing sentences for forms, doctors, emergency contacts, school paperwork, hospital intake, all the bureaucratic places where family still appears, as if it were guaranteed infrastructure. Julian never told me to forgive them. He never told me not to. That restraint was one of the reasons I trusted him. He understood that abandoned people get enough instructions from bystanders. What they need more often is witness. So he witnessed. He witnessed me the first Thanksgiving. I cooked too much because I did not know how to replace inherited excess with peace. He witnessed me in the parking lot outside a baby store, pregnant with Lena, crying over crib sheets because I realized I had no mother to call about any of it, and I was grieving advice I no longer trusted enough to want. He witnessed me when the girls were born, when sleep was scarce, when our apartment became a museum of burp cloths and half-finished tea. When joy arrived so physical, it made every old lack feel both smaller and somehow easier to name. We built a life. Not glamorous, not revenge-shaped, just steady. A row house with too little closet space. A kitchen painted the wrong white that I now refuse to fix because Mina once pressed both syrup pans against it, and I realized imperfect walls are sometimes the first honest luxury. We have neighbors who borrow sugar, a babysitter who calls me honey, a front step that bakes in summer, and daughters who think all furniture exists partly to be turned into forts. I am not saying this because domestic happiness is proof of virtue. I am saying it because if you disappear from someone's life long enough, you start imagining that whatever you missed will remain available in mint condition. But time does not preserve what you neglected. It grows around it. My parents did not know when Lena lost her first tooth. They did not know Mina hates bananas unless they are frozen. They did not know Julian still leaves me the heel of the sourdough loaf because he knows I like the end piece best. They did not know because they did not ask. Not on birthdays. Not after the girls were born. Not on the Christmas my cousin quietly texted, "Heard from your mom. She still says she's giving you space." Giving me space. That phrase did deserve to be framed. People love to rename what they chose when the old name starts making them look cruel. Space. As if silence had been a gift. What finally reached them, I would later learn, was a fall photo Tess posted online. Nothing dramatic. Just pumpkins, cardigans, one child missing a shoe, and Julian behind us holding 2 cider cups like fatherhood had always belonged in his hands. Tess tagged me. A cousin saw it. Then an aunt. Then, apparently, my mother. We saw the girls. That was the phrase that opened the voicemail. Not, "We've been thinking of you." Not, "We are sorry for how we left things." Not, "We made a terrible mistake. We saw the girls." I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand and understood something so thoroughly it was almost calming. They had not come back because time had healed them. They had come back because my life now contained people who could be introduced, photographed, claimed in partial sentences, and folded into the public version of a family. Maybe that was not the whole truth. Human motives rarely arrive alone. I am sure regret was in there somewhere. Curiosity, too. Age. Mortality. The shock of seeing your daughter become an older woman without your permission. But motive is often clearest in order. First, silence. Then proof of grandchildren. Then contact. The sequence said enough. Julian came home just before 6. I had made lentils, which was unfair to the lentils, because grief makes anything taste slightly ceremonial. He took one look at my face and set his bag down without asking for the efficient version. I played the voicemail. He listened. Then he exhaled once, through his nose, which is what he does when he is angry, but trying not to convert my pain into his performance. "What do you want?" he asked. It was the right question. Not, "What should you do?" Not, "Do you think they mean it?" Not, "Maybe this is good. What do you want?" I surprised myself by answering quickly. "I want them to have wanted me sooner." That was the cleanest truth. Not an apology script. Not a mediated lunch. Not a first grandparent visit, conducted in a cafe, like a hostage exchange. I wanted the impossible thing. I wanted love before leverage. Julian nodded. Because some griefs cannot be solved, only honored accurately. That night, after the girls were asleep, I made the mistake of calling my cousin Mara, who still orbit skims the family without ever fully landing. She picked up on the second ring and said, "So I guess they found you." Found. Not heard from. Not reached out. Found. I asked what she meant. Mara hesitated, which in family systems is usually just politeness putting on shoes. Then she told me my mother had shown the photo to 2 neighbors already. That my father had apparently said, "At least the girls look well cared for." That both of them were talking less like people shattered by loss, and more like people who had been handed an unexpected reopening. An opening to what, exactly, was left unsaid. But some motives do not need the courtesy of full sentences. I slept badly. The next morning, I drafted 5 different replies and deleted all of them. The first was cold. The second, too generous. The third sounded like therapy homework. The fourth sounded like I was auditioning for sainthood. The fifth was just 3 lines, and a kind of honesty I still was not sure I wanted documented. By noon, I understood that the real decision was not wording. It was framing. If I replied at all, what story was I agreeing to? A reunion delayed by pride? A misunderstanding corrected by time? A family healing for the sake of children? None of those were true. The truest version was less flattering. My parents had objected to my marriage so completely that they abandoned the relationship. Then, when they saw evidence that the marriage had produced warmth, stability, and children they could imagine loving, they wanted re-entry. Re-entry is not the same as remorse, and grandchildren are not moral detergent. I called Tess instead. She answered from a pharmacy line and said, "On a scale from 1 to arson, how are we doing?" I laughed so suddenly I almost cried. Then I told her. Tess was quiet for longer than Mara had been. Not because she was editing for kindness, because she knows me well enough to understand that the first truth is rarely the only one. Finally, she said, "If they had called when it was just you, I would think they were sorry. If they had called when you got engaged or pregnant or moved, I would think they were trying. Calling now, after a tagged photo, reads like retrieval." Retrieval. That was the word I had been reaching for. Not reunion, retrieval. As if my life had finally ripened into something worth collecting. By late afternoon, I sent a message. Not a speech, not a treatise, not an invitation to debate, just this. I received your voicemail. You chose not to be part of my life when I got married, and you remained absent through years that mattered deeply, including the births of my children. Because of that, I am not willing to open my daughter's lives as the starting point for a reconciliation you did not pursue when only I was involved. I wish you well, but I am not interested in contact at this time. I read it 7 times before sending. Then I sent it and immediately felt both lighter and sick. Boundaries are often described by people who do not need them as empowering. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they just feel expensive. My mother replied first. Of course she did. She said my message was cruel. She said people mature. She said they had thought I wanted distance. She said it was unfair to punish children for adult conflict. She said families should not be kept apart because of old mistakes. Old mistakes. That phrase again, the laundering machine of the self. My father sent a shorter message. We were trying to respect your choices. You are being unnecessarily harsh. Unnecessarily. As if harshness were the issue. As if 5 years of silence could be reclassified as etiquette. I did not answer. That was the first truly adult feeling of the whole thing. Not because silence is power. Because not every accusation deserves equal access to your nervous system. Weeks passed. Then a card came, no apology. Just pastel flowers, a quote about new beginnings, and $20 tucked inside for each girl, as though my family could be re-entered through stationery and denominations. I mailed it back. Not dramatically, no note, just returned. I tell this story now because I think a lot of people have been trained to believe that any family return is holy by default, that if people come back, you owe the door for existing. But return is not the same thing as repair. And longing for access to somebody's children is not proof that you loved the parent well. I am not saying my parents never loved me. That would be too easy and also untrue. I think they loved me in the way some people love houses. Deeply, proudly, conditionally. They loved me best when they could imagine my life reflecting well on theirs. What they did not know how to love was a daughter who made a choice that embarrassed the story before eventually beautifying it. That is why the children matter. Not because children are bait, because children made my life legible again to the very people who stopped reading when the plot turned against them. Lena is 6 now. Mina is 4. They know my mother and father only as abstract nouns, which is both sad and strangely merciful. Sometimes Lena asks why Julian has a sister nearby, but I do not visit my mom and dad. I tell her families are different, and some people do not know how to be close in safe ways. That answer will grow with her. One day I will give it more edges. But for now, it is enough. Children do not need the entire archive. They need the atmosphere. And the atmosphere in our house is calm. Not perfect, never perfect, but calm. No one here has to audition for belonging. No one here gets vanished for choosing love. No one here returns only once the photos look nice. Sometimes I still grieve them. That is the inconvenient part people on the outside rarely understand. You can be correct and still bereaved. You can know someone does not deserve access and still ache over the version of them you wanted to exist. There are mornings I still imagine what it would have felt like for my mother to show up. When Lena was born, frightened and delighted, holding a casserole dish and not an agenda. I imagine my father teaching Mina how to whistle. I imagine birthdays where nobody is being silently tested for loyalty to appearances. But imagination is not evidence. And children should not be offered up to satisfy adults who only recognize the family once it became photogenic. If I ever turn this story into something public, I would not frame it as my parents want my kids. That is blunt, and it misses the colder truth. I would frame it this way. They were willing to lose me when my life offended their script. Then they wanted back in once that same life started looking beautiful from a distance. That is the danger of people who confuse relationship with access. They think arrival counts more than absence. They think wanting in now should outrank leaving then. It does not. At least not here. The voicemail is still saved. I do not listen to it anymore. I do not need to. Its lesson was immediate, clear, expensive. We saw the girls. That was the whole story compressed. Not grief, not repair, not humble return. Recognition at last that the life they abandoned had become desirable. And by the time they noticed, it no longer belonged to them.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.